Lectern Q&A, and I'm here as usual with Ethan, and Ethan's laughing because I'm happy because it looks like maybe this time it hasn't glitched out, and we were able just to turn it on and go live. We've been battling with this, especially Ben in the background doing so much for several months. There's been continual shifting with the software. But anyways, here we are. We're ready to go. And as usual, I'm going to turn things over to Ethan.
Awesome. Well, welcome everybody to the Lectern Q&A. We do these monthly. As of 2026, we've decided to shift them from just being on the Lectern to also being on the channel live so that you guys can join. For those of you not familiar, we have pre-submitted questions from members on the Lectern, which I'll ask John about. They revolve around the theme that we have for today's Q&A. And then we'll also be able to take advantage of the fact that YouTube has a chat so that we can perhaps answer, if we have time, some questions from the YouTube chat. Now, for those of you who are on Riverside, on your desktop, watching this, you can also hit at the bottom, there's a big button that says call in live, and we'll be able to see you dialing in, let you in, and then it's kind of a bit like a talk show where you can just sort of call in and ask a question directly, right? So I think that's pretty much it. I will introduce a kind of like the theme just around it first, make a proposal for where I'm at with it, and then we can take it from there, basically.
Yes, Ethan, we perhaps also, especially for people who have maybe just joined, that we should make the announcement that next month, yes, go ahead.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Yes, everybody, this will be the last Lectern Q&A that John will be doing for a while, because right now, Mark Miller's wonderful course on the predictive processing, and the cognitive science of happiness and well-being is live on the Lectern. So we thought it'd be a good idea if for the next few months of the Lectern Q&As, while Mark is also teaching the course, that Mark comes on, Mark Miller, to do these Lectern Q&As so that we can switch it up a little bit and get different voices onto the platform to answer your questions.
Excellent.
Thanks for reminding me of that, John.
You're welcome. For those of you who may not know, Mark Miller is a former student of mine. He went to the cognitive science program, the undergraduate program at the University of Toronto. Then he studied with some of the best people in the world, Andy Clark and Carl Friston. He returned back to U of T, much to my delight. He teaches when I'm on sabbatical. When I was on sabbatical, he covered my courses. He's now still teaching for the program. He has a gazillion publications, both experimental and theoretical, in the in peer-reviewed journals. He gets excellent student evaluations at the University of Toronto. Everybody loves Mark, and he and I collaborate together. We work together. We publish together. I think I've not yet met a student who didn't almost immediately fall in love with Mark. Impressed both with his knowledge and also his ability to communicate and connect with people. He's an impressive individual, and so he's most welcome on the Lectern. Most welcome.
Yeah, and if you guys want to get a sense of Mark, we published a video a couple of days ago with me and Mark talking about the course. Since we have decided not to do AI trailers and things anymore, we decided to instead release conversations around the course ahead of time so that people get an understanding of what is we're covering. And I think when you watch that video, you'll get an absolutely clear sense of how Mark is able to distill very, very complex ideas into the most simple, lived-in experiential metaphors, and also deeply personal. And you also get a sense of his zestiness as a person, which is immediately endearing. I fell in love with him the first time I talked to him. Yeah.
Excellent. For one more thing about Mark is not just a scientist, he's a long-term practitioner. He's engaged in an ecology of practices. So he also knows a lot of this material from the inside. So when he's talking about meditative states, mystical experiences, etc., he's not just talking abstract theoretically, he's also talking existentially and transformatively. So yeah, don't miss this opportunity. This is somebody, Mark is going, I'm very confident, Mark is going to be a star. He is going to be an academic star. This is a chance to to spend time with him, talk with him, learn from him.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that it's existential and not just abstract theory, because abstraction is loosely the term that we have for today's Q&A.
Right.
So
Right.
this is around something I brought to you, I think, last week or last week, which I've coined the underground man problem.
Yes. And you're making reference to Dostoevsky's
Yes.
powerful novel in which everybody reliably says, I hate the underground man. I remember when Jason was reading it and he said, I hate him. And I went, good. That's the point. Right. Yes.
Yeah. And so maybe let's figure out what the underground man problem is. So I originally proposed it as we're now inundated with a lot of material around how to understand your mind, right? How to understand reality, theories of how the world is, what it can do, what it should do, where AI is going to go, yada, yada, yada. And what that does and concerns me is that it creates kind of like an infinite regress of abstraction, where it's almost like you called it like a hyper Hamlet.
Yeah, yeah.
Where the
It's
reflectiveness gap
Vellman.
is
It's called the Vellman, the reflectiveness gap. Yes.
Yeah, and so I found as a practitioner and a facilitator a lot of rights, like working with folks trying to overcome like, how do I go from this far back level of abstraction, right? When it's almost automatic, like, and then how do I actually come in and be in the embodied experience, right? What is it to even just feel my feelings, so to speak? I was just having a conversation about that barely an hour ago, and I know that your work, especially on seeing God again for the first time, even from realizing the imaginal, emphasizing the non-propositional, the embodied, the imaginal, which I see as mitigating this reflectiveness gap and the underground man problem.
Yeah, that's Corbin's excellent thesis. So Corbin's facing Plato's requirement that the person that has come out of the cave must return into the cave, or the Stoics, the view from above. You don't end above; you return back. And Corbin says, but what allows us to do this? What bridges between the sensible world, the sensual world, and the intellectual? He would mean the noetic, the abstract, like we're talking about here. And his proposal is it's exactly the imaginal that does that. It's important to recognize that, especially for Corbin, the imaginal is not merely psychological, it's also ontological, not just levels of mind, levels of construal, it's levels of reality. So they're being co-realized. And so the imaginal is the place that does that. This is why I've been placing, as you say, so much emphasis on realizing the imaginal, the role that imaginal plays in science, and then especially religion as the place where we do the serious play with the imaginal in a liminal way that affords us making those kinds of connections that afford us aspiring towards wisdom and sainthood and sagehood, etc.
So this might be a little bit helpful because you've talked quite a great deal about the imaginal. I'm wondering if there's a way in which you could speak to the opposite end. Like, what does it feel like, based on at least what I've described, and I think we have a certain degree of shared reality around it. What would you describe as like the phenomenology of the underground man problem? How have you seen that show up?
Well, where you see it, I mean, so Vellman proposes it. He proposes it, and he gives us the example of Hamlet. You get somebody who's perpetually stepping back into more and more abstraction, and then critically reflecting upon how they were previously framing a situation. So I was framing it like this, and then I step back and look at it, taking off the glasses, kind of metaphor. Now Vellman makes clear you have to do that, because if you never do that, you're a wanton. You're just bound up with chaotic cacophony of impulsivity, right? So you have to do this to some degree. But when you get to a certain place, what happens is I've with Hamlet, you get disconnected. This is what Bellman says from the engine of motivation. You're so uncoupled from the world that you become radically indecisive. And then what Dostoevsky does, because he's got such good existential bent to it, he says when somebody comes radically indecisive like that, because existence, think of Kierkegaard, existence is to make real committed decisions. When you become radically indecisive, you become radically irresponsible, and you also become radically disconnected, and those two things make you an asshole nihilist. And that's what the underground man is. He's irresponsible, he's indecisive, he's nihilistic, he treats people in uh, right. And so what he does, the phenomenology is, you're up here in this abstract nowhere, no, and he's the nowhere man, that the Beatles song, right? And you're indecisive, you're nihilistic, you're irresponsible, you treat people poorly, and then in order to do any action, you fall and collapse into chaotic impulsivity. You create chaos around you, is what he does, and then you withdraw back into the abstract, and you vacillate between being a wanton, a chaotic wanton, and being this nihilistic, irresponsible, indecisive asshole. And that's the underground man. And that's why you hate him, because he has neither spontaneity nor commitment. And so that's the
Mm.
phenomenology.
Isn't like just that bit when you said vacillating? I'm reminded of when I was like much younger. Um, I would experience something like it's a warped kind of certainty. It's like, oh, I see what's going on here, and look at all of these things, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I also think, oh, okay, I'm a part of this too. Well, I can do this. So there's almost like a sense of uplifting, but in a superiority sense, right?
Oh,
Like,
I
oh,
I was the same way. I probably still am. Hopefully, it's
mm,
being mitigated by all this practice and uh, all the people in my life that are virtuous, um, to my
same
benefit.
here.
Uh, so, um,
But sorry, John. Just to finish that thought
oh,
a
sorry.
little
Go
bit, and
ahead.
then I'll continue. But it gets to that place of like a kind of inflation, and then there's almost like a break where I will go almost like, fuck it, whatever, and then do pretty much the contradictory
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah.
how that worked for me is I would get up there. I would think of myself as godlike in the pejorative sense, inflationary, very much
Mm,
inflationary, and then it would collapse, and I would collapse down. And for me, that collapse was not just wantonness; it would be a very dark depression, which you also see in
same.
the underground man,
Yeah.
because I come back to a world that is chaotic and flat, and in which I've lost my sense of. So you vacillate between inflation and collapse, inflation and collapse. I'm not. I don't have bipolar disorder or anything like that. This is parasitic processing. This is an existential uh, kind of modal confusion that you fall into, and it really rips you apart, and it rips the people around you apart.
Yeah.
Because what's happening is your agency is being undermined, and your selfhood and your personhood are being undermined. Everything's being sort of side through you, like, and um, it's incredibly powerful as a cycle, because each one propels you into the other. When you're down here, you crave something that will free you from the depression, and so you leap into the inflation. And then, of course, the problem with the inflation is it gives you a sense of inappropriate invulnerability, and then you get blindsided, and you get collapse. Yeah, I think Vellman's essay combined with Dostoevsky's novel. We did it in Literature and the Meaning Crisis.
Yeah.
Um, I think that those two together, and you get an excellent understanding. And you can see the culture doing the same thing. You see the culture vacillating. between these two things, the transcendence and the finitude, have been severed from each other.
Mm.
They're not held in tonos. And so the culture vacillates. This is what I actually argued in literature in the meaning crisis. The meaning crisis is when these become untethered and you get inflationary Ahab and you get the pretty much impulsive Ishmael who's indecisive and
Yeah.
incapable, right? And what's going on. Anyways, I won't go on about that. But there's so much literature, both nonfiction, philosophical reflection, and fantastic literature, fiction, that picks up on this pattern and is trying to wake us up to it. And I think that's because it's powerful and pervasive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I really like what you're naming in the sense that there is literally no middle way.
No,
There's no slowing down that elevator. It just goes. And just to play, like, I want to make sure that we're not demonizing, even though we call it the underground man problem. It's not a demonization of characters or persons. But in the interest of steel manning that, it does feel, if I take that on, if I try that on for a little bit, it can feel like I'm constantly surprised by things like that blindsiding that you were talking about. Oh, I can't believe this happened. Of all things, this would happen. And there's a powerlessness that I remember feeling at the bottom of
yeah,
that,
yeah.
which lends itself to a kind of, oh, but I can control it. I can do something about it. So there's an agency piece in there. It just doesn't have the reach.
No,
So
it's kind of an atrophying of agency.
yeah. Atrophy is the right word. It's like it feels like the more that one tries to control it, the worse it gets. So talk about parasitic processing. It then moves to that place of, oh, but if I understand it better, which is a kind of co-opting of that control piece, right? Then I'll get it. And that's where the lift starts going up
Oh,
floor by floor.
yeah. And then what happens is, and you see it in the underground man, you get the combination of arrogance and atrophy. And you get an arrogant atrophy. And think about how pervasive that is in our culture. Trolling is often a combination of those two. It's motivated by people who are quite arrogant, and yet they also feel a certain kind of rage and powerlessness over things. And this is why they do what they do. Um,
Yeah.
and so I, I'm glad you've brought this out because I hadn't quite clean. I mean, I did and I didn't. You often help me to remember connections. The connection between, right, this problem, the underground man problem, and the loss of the tonos of transcendent finitude. I think, and the way that shows up in suffering, which means the loss of personhood, selfhood, and agency, their atrophying, their withdrawal, the fact that he's not even a moral monster. Like he's just an amoral. Ugh. I mean, like he's not Kurtz. Like Kurtz is or Ahab. There's something they're impressive individuals, but the underground man is like he's pathetic, but you have no compassion for him, so he's so arrogant and hurtful to everyone around him. Yeah, this tying these three together, well done, Ethan, well done.
Well, I want to stress test this a little bit because before we move into the pre-submitted questions, because at least in practice, we talked about this before, right? Vedanta has a particular kind of practice where you're constantly stepping back and looking at the subjective knower,
That's
right?
right.
How come the levels of abstraction all the way up for the underground man doesn't just create Vedanta? Why is the underground man not
Oh,
realized? Right.
That's an excellent and appropriate question, because what happens in the level of abstraction, right? So I won't go into the full argument, but the argument is that these kinds of problems, right? Because right, if you don't have a proper ecology of practices, you're going to bump into cosmic absurdity. That's what we're talking about here, right?
Right.
Um, And then that gets sort of reinforced when you collapse into the darkness. Um, what you need something that is ready, like ready to hand, prochiron, to transform, to do an aspect shift on the absurdity, where instead of these two perspectives being untethered and undermining each other, they actually all of a sudden interpenetrate in a non-duality, so that, right, you see the world in a grain, the opposite of what we're talking about, the opposite of the vacillation, the inflation and the collapse, is to see the world in a grain of sand, because then you are right. And that's what Vedanta does. Vedanta says, when you're doing this, right, when you get this, right, you realize that Atman is Brahman. And so the most interior, the most specific, is actually at one with the most exterior, the most universal. And you get what William Desmond, who's now a friend, and this one of the great benefits. Well, I don't know, not about benefits. One of the great achievements. I don't know if that's the right word. One of the great
Rewards, gifts.
events of my life. Yeah.
Yeah.
He talks about, the intimate universal, which is the true realization of realness. So what happens is, in Vedanta, because you pass to prajna and that non-duality, you get a radical reconnection to you get a radical reconnection to reality, and you get a recovery of a non-egocentric agency. You get an ontocentric agency, and then that reverberates through your selfhood and your personhood. So you like it, so in, when although this isn't Vedanta, Buddhism has it quite clearly. Wisdom, which is to have that prajna, is always bound up intrinsically, inherently. They're not two stages; they're two sides of the same coin. It's bound up with karuna, with compassion, because soon as you realize this, you it's Augustine, love God and do what you want. Once you have, right, this deep realization, and you move to an ontocentric sense of agency, selfhood, and person, not only do you have more effective agency, think of how your agency is improved in the flow state as it becomes less egocentric, not diminished. So you get an enhancement. But the thing is, and this is the dark night of the soul, you pass close to that horizon of horror, to the absurdity, to the sense that things are empty. This is St. John of the Cross as the prototypical example. And then because you can't will it. The metanoetic shift has to you participate in it like a grand insight. It carries you, it transforms you, it conveys you. And that's what happens in Vedanta, that's what happens in Buddhism, that's what happens in Zen, that's what happens at the peak of Neoplatonism. That ultimate threat becomes the ultimate realization that satisfies your ultimate concerns. um, and because we have a cross-cultural, cross-historical convergence on this that is well documented, and people can get a sense of this in practice, we have good reason to find the proposal very plausible.
Yeah. There's. I wanna start to feed in some of these questions, because I think we've gone to quite a good place. One of the ways in which I've heard reports of the underground man problem is that it's pretty automatic. It's not something that's necessarily willfully done. I think it does get to a point where that cosmic absurdity is crushing and exerts a lot of pressure. And a part of me wants to also say, well, if you're at that level of cosmic absurdity, then it is no less meaningful or meaningless to be to enjoy the finer things in life, right? If you're at that level. Okay. But I also can hear how this kind of phenomenology is not a conceptual thing. It's much more deeply felt, and this is in line with some of the work that my partner Ellie's been doing on dissociation. So she's dropped in a question, which
Oh,
I will ask
dissociation,
on behalf.
dissociation, depersonalization, derealization. I think they form a network. They're
Yeah.
overlapping. There's a family resemblance thing going on there. But anyways, go ahead.
Yes. And so the question is, I'm interested in how I can learn more about the cognitive science of dissociation, for example, the relationship between dissociation, PP, and RR. What is the relationship between dissociation and being and non-being? Because in dissociative disorders, which often happen to people as maladaptive coping disorders, or in some serious cases, there's a structural like multiplying or fracturing of alters or a sense of
Yep.
otherness within the intrapsychically, right? That may or may not know about each other. So, how are those with dissociative disorders enacting predictive processing and relevance realization if the wholeness of the self is splintered, whose agency is necessarily being enacted? And she refers to Paula Thompson, who calls the act of the kind of dissociation required for performing artists, elite athletes, military soldiers as volitional dissociation. I've talked about this with Mark as a controlled dissociation as well. And she draws parallels to how shamans, religious leaders are trained to enter and exit dissociative states of their own volition. Now, you've talked about this in the form of decentering. It's convergent with the decentering work that Patrick McNamara is doing.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
disruptive strategies. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the crux of the question is really this sense of like what is the science of dissociation to your view, and what is the philosophical ramification of that insofar as being and non-being is concerned?
Well, the first thing to say at the scientific end is that this is another instance of where predictive processing needs relevance realization, and especially notions of opponent processing and self-organizing criticality, which are not central theoretical features of predictive processing. So the standard model is sort of the thing that would produce sort of the Gaussian norm is predictive processing hits trade-off relationships, exploit, explore, consistency, completeness, all that sort of stuff, bias variance, and it does opponent processing. The problem is that, and this is something Patrick McNamara makes very clear, is but you have a stack, right? And this is so relevant to the underground, man. You have stuff that's at a very low level and stuff that's at a very high level of abstraction. And what you can do, and here's where McNamara makes use of Herman's and a couple other people, the dialogical self, that you have what he calls I positions. Uh, I'm going to be talking to Patrick because I have a proposal, but I've argued that what he's saying is we have an indexicality from which we are projecting and participating in our perspectival knowing. So we can take the perspective of we can prioritize the mid level of the stack, and that's me, and that's my I position, and that's me doing my perspectival knowing from my heart, or I can go from my gut. Right, that's my standpoint. That's what this is. I'm here now, right? I'm here now, and this is where I'm coming from. And it's a prioritization of both the kind of processing, the level of processing, and then that entails the scope and acuity of the processing that's going on there. And so you have multiple agents available to you at all times. Now, part of his proposal, and one that I also have argued convergently, is that one of the functions of narrative is to create a through line so that you get a way of binding various eyes together, eye positions. So you get an eye, which is the imaginal, right, sort of IDOS of all of the eye positions. Now, and then of course that puts you into potential interaction with other selves, and then you need normativity, and then there's a potential for personhood. There's a long complex argument there, and I'm going very quickly. So you have all these agencies, and then some of them are getting exapted into selfhood, some of them are getting exapted into personhood, and then within those like right, your selfhood is bound up with, think about your selfhood as a network of particular ways in which agents are being bound into stories. So I can have this role as a teacher, or this role as a father, or this role as a friend. And as I go up
Mm,
into personhood, right, the self, right, is being bound to different norms. I can be a self that is seeking truth, seeking beauty, seeking intelligibility, seeking oneness, etc., etc. Okay, so we have a very we have a very complex system, and because it's doing relevance realization within opponent processing, it's going through self-organizing criticality, which means there's periods where the entropy is increasing, and disruptive strategies increase that, because sometimes you have to break the frame, the optimal grip, in order to afford a better
mm.
framing.
Is
Disruptive
that the
strategy,
volitional dissociation piece?
this is what you
Disruptive
can do.
strategy?
Yes, yes,
Great.
you can do various decentering strategies, which is you right. So McNamara's idea is you basically place, this is serious liminal play. You
Sorry,
place,
John, could you come closer to the mic? Sorry,
yeah,
because
sorry, yeah,
it's a bit soft.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You place you place that imaginal self into a liminal space. You disconnect it. There's the dissociation. So you disconnect it from the agencies, which means they are now potentially fragmentary, right? You disconnect it. And what you're doing is you're ultimately, and he invokes self organizing criticality. You disconnect it because you're helping it, hoping that it, and you're in what's called a pivotal mental state, which means this is a trigger for enhanced learning, enhanced suggestibility. This is
Mm,
enhanced internalization. You can imitate better. You can take in. So you dissociate and you can take in new models of the self. The self reorganizes, and then its job, return to the cave, right, is to rebind the agents together. So the dissociative, when it is volitional, this is what he thinks religion does, is it actually does these disruptive strategies to break down, right, sort of stabilized structures that have ossified, in order to afford evolvability of our agency, our selfhood, and our personhood.
Ah, okay. So just let me just check if I'm following.
So, in one
Okay.
point,
Also, go ahead. Go ahead. Yep.
the pathological version is that pivotal mental state is being triggered because you are facing a demand to evolve your evolvability, to not just pick up this or that skill, but to evolve your ability of picking up skills in general, because the environment is suddenly deeply surprising in a highly volatile and potentially violent way. And so the pathological forms is you dissociate, but then, right, what happens, at least according to the theory, is you can't properly reintegrate after the
Mm.
dissociation. So I just wanted to get that clear.
Yeah, yeah. It fractures beyond the point of repair.
Right. So criticality is exactly part of a feature of criticality is the real potential for collapse. The avalanches, and if the environmental conditions are a certain way, the avalanche just collapses the whole thing. It just destroys it. It destroys the whole process, right? And so you criticality means the system can actually destroy itself. Now, in self-organizing criticality, the criticality gets redrawn up into
Mm.
reorganization and restructuring. But there's always, just like adaptivity, always carries with it the threat of self-deception. Criticality always carries with it the threat of fragmentation.
Okay, so let me see if I can recapitulate what you said in at least simpler language that I can understand.
Sorry.
So no, this is good. This is my job, right?
Yeah.
So the idea being that we have multiple standpoints, the through line of which like different what you call I positions or different aspects of me,
Yes.
right? That have roles to play, skills to enact, beliefs that are held, perspectives that are
And
held.
scopes of engagement with the world, right?
Yeah, yeah. I call those ways of being, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, sure.
like so those all come together to form pretty much the story of your life, right? But when I say story, I don't mean writing it down, but as in a lived
Your
experience of being.
autobiographical self, the sense that
Yes.
that you can identify with the 4-year-old and you're concerned about the 75-year-old. Yes, exactly that. You're a
Yeah.
temporally extended agent. That's what a self is. And you're also extended into levels of reflection, which you can stand back and look at yourself. That's what happens in a good story. There's levels of construal, there's development of agency, etc., etc.
I love that you named that because we're going to come back to it on the back of Lauren's question, which I think is absolutely fantastic. So in dissociation, what's happening is we're putting the story of your life, including everything that's packaged with it, such that it forms the agent, into a liminal space, so that it can break out of the box. Right?
Yep.
The
Because
ways of being
it's got
that
a
one is
certain way of framing the world. It's got a certain way of framing the world.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the idea is that it can break out of that box, discover something new, and then make a bigger box.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So home that back in.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly that. I mean, the idea is that dissociation, disruptive strategies, entropy introduction are part of an irremovable part of development. Yeah.
So can I ask, how does that? This is part of the philosophical end of it. How does that relate to being and non-being?
So what it does is it actually shows the interweaving of the being of the self, and its non-being. That contrary to what we want to think, that there's being and then there is non-being as a dichotomy, it actually says no, no, no. Non-being is interwoven into the very dynamics of the being of the self, of the agent, of the person.
Yes. Even the doubt that you are real is real doubt.
Yeah, and the Buddhists have a metaphor for this, is that, um, and I tried to talk about this when I was talking to Lex Friedman, that your mortality is not a future death. Your mortality is that you are constantly vulnerable to dying, and that you need that, or else you can't properly grow. Jesus talks about this too, right? The seed has to be placed in the ground and die in order for the plant to be born.
This is so good because what you're offering gives me like two paths to choose
good.
in terms of the questions.
Well,
Because I think they're both relevant.
Let's thank the Buddha and let's thank Jesus, because these are the people I'm drawing on to try and to come up with an answer to your question, and Carl Friston as well. Carl wouldn't want to be placed in the same category as Jesus and the Buddha, but yeah.
Well, okay, let's do is choose your own adventure style. Would you like to step into the religious practice end of things, or would you like to step into the relevance realization camp?
The religious practice.
Great, let's do this. So this is Luke's question. How can prayer and other rites be abstracted from a relational ritual context into a removed resonance chamber or a realm of regret and reprimand? And it says here, my lack of respect for prayer as a ritual has to do with its role in reinforcing really repugnant behavior. Is that just me? The Brent Cooper distinguishes between vicious and virtuous abstraction. So how can meditation, prayer, contemplation, confirmation, communion, confession, and other practices go right and wrong? What kinds of abstraction are good? How do we practice them?
Yeah, I think this is very good. And there has been a movement on Cynthia Beauregard is, one of the main figures. Again, a woman. I will keep doing this. I will keep flagging how women are taking a leadership role in the advent of the sacred. That this is not a coincidence. Everybody, when you get a chance, keep dipping in, or maybe even following you, because I can only dip in. Britt Hartley and the journey she's on is really, really interesting and really impressive. And Britt, if you happen to see this, you and I will be talking again, no doubt soon. but I want to encourage you to keep going. What your work is a tremendous benefit. So Cynthia Beauregard has basically pointed out, that there are different types of prayer, and this can get very complex. But one of the main differences, and Lewis, I don't want to be presumptive, but what I'll do is I'll say how your disgust lands for me. Okay, so one distinction that people make is between petitionary prayer and between what is called centering prayer. It's actually would be better called decentering prayer, if we used McNamara, but she calls it centering. You're getting centered in God. So the point of the prayer is not to ask for anything other than to ask to be recentered, to be decentered, and so you become less egocentric and more ontocentric. So that God become it's interesting because it's a kind of abstraction from egocentrism that is then taken back up as the sensed presence of God, right? And so that's how it doesn't just become vicious abstraction. It doesn't just become the Hamlet thing. You abstract out of egocentrism, and then ontocentrism is not an abstraction, it is a sensed presence. And you get faced and called and placed by God. And I've talked about that in Seeing God Again for the first time, making use of the excellent work of Mark Wynn. And we're trying to get Mark Wynn to come on the lectern. Mark, if you see this, I absolutely adore your work, and I think it is brilliant. I hope we talk. I've reached out to Patrick, and I think his work is fantastic, and we're going to be talking soon. One of the great privileges of this is I get to talk to, interact with these people, and so I think prayer, insofar as it's a centering or decentering, or perhaps now a better word is a recentering prayer. What we're doing is we're recentering the locus. And what happens is we start to realize reality as what Nishitani would say, sort of circumessential, that anything can be this, anything is the center of everything else. And so God, this is the Neoplatonic tradition. God is the intelligible sphere whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. And this affords you opening up, like holographically, while emptying out of any trying to bind it. So nothing is excluded and nothing is enclosed. That's a kind of abstraction that feeds back into an exaptation so that you get a sense presence. And I think um, that's and the fact that it's dialogical in nature is just because the self is dialogical in nature. And this is where McNamara and my work converges quite well. A lot of other people's work and the parts revolution that's going on, and the psychedelic renaissance that's happening. All of this are pushing pushing us towards this model because you get ego death and psychedelic experience, etc. Leatherby and others. So the way of putting this all together is, Lewis, can you think of prayer as dialogos with not a person, but it's nevertheless a personal. Knitter makes this really good in his book, because I've been talking about this a lot. Without Buddha, I couldn't be a Christian. He talks about how, right, this sense of it's dialogical and it's personal, because as the child is to the adult is to the sage. So your agency is being exapted into selfhood. Your selfhood is being exapted into personhood. And it's personal because your personhood, and you don't leave these behind. The self is nested within the person, and the agent is the personal is being exapted towards the saint or the sage. And so it's a personal process of recentering. It's a dialogical, it's a dialogos, something faces you and calls you and places you beyond your personal egocentric self and agency. And that's what the prayer can be. So I pray that way. An example of an example of trying to do this, you can do it very concretely. So I've been trying to I'm reading an excellent book, The Philosophy of Jesus as a Way of Life, and I've been talking to Bishop Maximus periodically, is that I have committed to I only understood Socrates when I internalized and practiced Socrates. I only understood Siddhartha to the degree to which I understand either one of these individuals when I internalized and practiced, and I've done those. I need to do this, and it's obviously deeply challenging for me because of my past, but I'm endeavoring to do this with Jesus, right? And so and I'm particularly influenced by Marshall Davis, another person I want to talk to, because he's got an interpretation of Christianity and Jesus in terms of non-duality, and it's brilliant. His exegesis. He wrote a little book called The
Nice.
Gospel According to Jesus, which is the gospel told from the perspective of Jesus, and it's just oh. Anyways, so one of the things is and you can hear the Greek worry here. The Greeks got terrified when they realized their gods were only immortal and not eternal. This is one of the sparks of philosophy. I pray. So there's an impulse that comes up in me, comes up in all of us. If only I could live forever, right? And this is for Buddhism. This is a deep. This is the thirst. This is the deep attachment, right? So when that comes up, I let it swell up in me, and as it's about to be spoken, may I live forever. I turn it. I it's like Tai Chi. I play with it.
You morph it.
Yeah, I morph it, and it comes out as may I live so deeply that I don't want to live forever.
Mm.
Right, and this is a recentering prayer. This is a recentering prayer. So, Lewis, I've tried to give you a theoretical explanation. I've tried to give you a concrete example of how it works.
It's Luke's question, by the way, John.
Oh, Luke, I'm sorry,
Luke.
Lewis.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Luke. I'm sorry, both of you. I misheard. I apologize.
So okay, small technical thing I wanted to add to this. There's I think staying closer to the mic would be very helpful.
Yeah,
Because I
okay.
think we're starting to get into that place where I don't want any nuggets to fall through the cyberspace. Just to address something that Luke had mentioned as well in the question around.
Let me double check and make sure my mic also hasn't shifted. Just give me one sec.
Oh, it's perfect. It's perfect, John.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Don't touch it.
I've changed its trajectories, its angle, I should say. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's perfect now. Yeah, so I wanted to address something that Luke had named in terms of like communion and community. And I was just talking to Nicole Barden yesterday, and she and I have developed a kind of mutual kinship. At least I hope it's mutual. So Nicole, if
Yeah.
you're watching this, I want you to know I hope our kinship is mutual. And we were talking about dukkha.
Right.
So what happens when someone comes and they are let's say trapped in their parasitic process in their off center, because that's what dukkha is, that the center of the wheel is off.
Yeah.
And I was asking her, well, how do you as an abbot approach that? How do you hold them that? And she's amazing. She was talking to me about exactly the same terms that you're just using, like centering within the compassionate eye, and then both wheels turn together. In the studying of the Dharma.
Yeah.
And it is in the turning, which I see as what you are naming as the dialogos.
Yes.
When that starts to move, then the person is recentered, right?
Yep.
So it's no longer off. And the fact that, we've talked a lot about Zen Neoplatonism, but I just love that you brought in the Neoplatonic pole, and I can sort of bring in the Zen a little bit to sort of meet.
Nicole's amazing. I also want to speak something here. Because I mean, I want to do this very carefully because I don't want to take any credit away from you. So please hear that. But it's also gratifying for me that one of my students, and in some ways you are one of my students, but you're also a peer, but at the theoretical level and to some degree the practice level, you're one of my students. That has enabled you to enter into a resonant dialogos with somebody like Nicole. That's fantastic. I mean, that for me, that's a kind of, I think, virtuous confirmation that I'm teaching well, because if it affords my students to be able to interact with people like Bishop Maximus or Nicole Bauden in a way that is mutually resonant, um, first of all, I want to thank you, and I want to express gratitude, because for me, that's like, yeah, that says something. I'm sort of struggling to articulate, but it says something.
Yeah, in fact, I take that and I really appreciate it because it surprised me as well.
Yeah.
Like, we've talked twice now, and we go on like a house on fire. And this.
Oh, I
this
just want
deep
to say one more thing.
reverence.
I want to give
Yes.
credit to Nicole too. Like it's like, yeah, I just like she has
Yeah.
that ability to connect to people. Sorry for interrupting, but I didn't want to leave that out.
No, exactly. But that's the thing that was really surprising to me, where it previously would have been in a way like I wouldn't have been able to perceive it.
Yeah.
I won't be able to feel it. It wouldn't land with me. But I think rightly so, due to what we're sort of explicating and what the work that we're doing, I cannot ignore the surprise, the way it's different, and the reality of what is. So even when we were talking about teacher-student relationships in the context of a monastic setting, I also named to her that, like, in a lot of ways, I see you as a teacher, but I also orient myself. So it's not just unilateral, but I orient myself to learn even when you're not trying to teach me anything.
That's good.
That's really, really good. So this also folds in, I think, a thread into Lauren's question. So
Okay, Lauren.
just as a kind of, in a way, it's trying to fold in the conceptual, right? Where Ellie sort of was talking about, brought in a question around the phenomenological, Luke's bringing in a question around the practical. Lauren brings in, I think, quite a powerful angle, which has to do with the way in which predictive processing and relevance realization are always at work. That also means the act of listening to us have this conversation, the act of conceptualizing any of this at all, is playing into the very experience of the advent of the sacred.
Yeah.
So
Of course.
she's asking, primordial and ultimacy. Will you please discuss primordiality and ultimacy in the model of religio and the sacred symbolon? I'm seeking a more representational understanding of these terms. These two terms in the context of this model are still abstract to me. So here are my thoughts on this topic. Mm-hmm. What is the primordial in the model of religio and the self-seeking sacredness? Is it the essence of the self? Maybe. Is it what we fundamentally are and is also our optimal grip and resonance with our environment and the large world? Is the self's primordial religio static? Yes and no. The spark of the person, the essence of who she is, it seems, would not change. But largely, it seems like the self's primordial religio would be constantly changing, because in the very act of interacting with her environment and the large world, the way she behaves and thinks about herself, her religio, her optimal grip, would necessarily change. Mm-hmm. Is it the person's orientation? I think this is part of it, but not all of it. There's more here, but I have to, I'm trying to capture the essence of the question as much as possible. So she says here, I'm trying to articulate how the self and the sacred necessarily interact for transformation in each individual's life. Primordial and ultimate, as used in this model, are still abstract for me, and I sense there's a level of understanding about the self or sacred interaction that I'm missing because of this. Mm-hmm. How do the concepts of primordial and ultimate inform the model of the self and the sacred?
Okay. So, first of all, I'm continually surprised in a good way by the sophistication of my students. For those of you who might not know, Lauren has been taking a course. She's been taking Seeing God Again for the first time. So I'll just give a little bit of background. I was making a proposal for senses of the sacred that the sacred has. Well, let's do it. There's a
Mm,
sense of the sacred, and this is emphasized in Taoism. Lauren, initially this will be abstract because I'm just trying to set the context, and then I'll address your question of where does the functionality and the phenomenology actually show up. Okay, um, uh, so the sense of the sacred, like in Taoism, the sacred is the primordial. It is that from which we are born. It is that which makes us possible. It is that which we are always presupposing as what we have to take as granted because we can't grant it to ourselves. So, for example, I can't, as we said in the beginning, I can't stand outside of predictive processing and relevance realization. There's no way where I can get outside of them and then look at them and say, that's what's wrong with my relevance realization by predictive processing. I always, whatever I'm doing, I'm always relying on the capacity of predictive processing and relevance realization to self-correct, which I can participate in. So it's a process I'm always presupposing. If I try to make any concept, any categorization, any argument, any proposition, any theory, acquire any skill, undergo any change in how I understand myself, I am presupposing these things. They are primordial to me. Now, how does that show up in my experience? That shows up in my experience at in the sense of my intuition, the sense that the things are coming up for me that I know not how I know them, but they're making possible for me. And so for many people, they use a term for a dimension of selfhood, for trying to talk about the depths that they experience as intuitive interruptions into their everyday narrative. They call that their soul. And so I think that when people are soulful in this sense, not that they're talking about a Cartesian substance, but when they say, and notice where do you place your intuition? It's in your guts, right? Just think, why not your knees? Why not your feet? Because you're trying to get at this sense of, right, that's the primordial and it wells up in me. It wells up in me. And then the intuitions can be very minor and the intuitions can be very, very profound. And you often note that the intuition, right, when it's one of those profound intuitions, people will experience it archetypally, to put a Jungian phrase on it. They'll experience it
mm,
as being, oh, this is deep. Listen to the word. This is deep. And it's right. Okay. There's that. Ultimacy. Ultimacy is, right, the sense that there is, I want to use my words very, very carefully here. You have a sense of normativity that is that transcends you, that is beyond you. That if you could make the true, the good, and the beautiful and the real, they would not be true, good, beautiful, and real. You have to defer to them. Listen to the language. We look up. We look up, right? And for many people, that sense of uplifting, looking up, the sense that we are being called by something greater, something that is skyward for us in an imaginal sense, that's the spirit. And so when we feel that we're being uplifted, when we feel that the self is moving into its spiritual functions, that it is being called to something more true, something more beautiful, something more real. So when you listen and notice how a great work of art, right? Notice these two different senses of sacredness and how a great work of art. So, you're listening to the Moonlight Sonata. For me, this is an example by Beethoven, and stuff like the primordial is, it's just because it's music, it reaches into my guts and it's coming up, but I'm also getting a sense of a beauty greater than John Vervaeke then can generate, and it's resonant and it's calling me beyond my, so there's a spiritual uplift with, and it's the moon, it's the moonlight. The moon is above you, but it's eerie in the nighttime, it's in the dark, and it reaches into the darks and the depths. Like, don't you get it almost like a shiver, and it goes up your spine, And that's the sense of the sacred as the central, that the binding, that charge, the centrality. And you sometimes experience it literally in your spinal column that binds the primordial, oh, and the spiritual, sense of sacred together. And you get this. And then that, right? That gives you the place from which you orient. That is how you placed. This is the axis mundi that gets right. Uh, that of everywhere you could be, this is where you are. You are insofar as spiritual uplift and soulful intuition are charging you, giving you that sense of a radical, weird in the good sense of the word, weird connection between the primordial and the ultimacy, the ultimate. And you can get it in great works of art like the Moonlight Sonata, and it's called the Moonlight Sonata for a reason. You can get it in great poetry. You can, so the archaic bust of Apollo by Rilke, he's looking at this sculpture, and intuition is welling up in him. This sexual and artistic eros is welling up in him. He's getting the sense of like the presence, like, and it's like, oh, and it's he's and then it flips. You must change your life. That's a normative call. You must change your life. And when I first read that, a chill went through me because the ultimate and the primordial were one, not logically one, they were one. And I got that charge and I went, ugh, and I was suddenly reoriented in my life and I recovered my life in a new way. And so, insofar as the spirit can can feel an upsurge from the soul, and it can feel uplifted, uh, the self by the spirit, these are how it's showing up in the self, and how they're showing up functionally, and how they're showing up phenomenologically.
Just to add one small thing there about conceptually, from my
Yeah.
own sort of experience, like it, I had a moment like that to tie it back into sort of the encounter with Nicole. I actually put off messaging her for a long time. I felt like there was something about it that was procrastinating it, procrastinating reaching out, because I felt like, oh, I'm not a I'm not a spiritual person or something like that. Like I'm not, or like some idea of like I'm not spiritual enough to talk to a Zen abbot, so, which is a very weird thing for me to think. Um, and then I was playing Hallelujah on the guitar, right? So practice, and it was
Uh,
that one that one
Leonard
yeah,
Cohen's
Cohen.
Hallelujah. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So and there was that one line of there's a blaze of light in every word. It doesn't matter which you heard, right?
Yeah.
That like I just immediately like I was overwhelmed with emotion. I started tearing and just I was trying to sing. For days I couldn't get through that song without being moved, right? And there was something in there that reconciled for me of like uh, hearing Christopher Oldfield sort of in the back of my mind, saying yes, but all transformation is spiritual.
Mm.
Like it's always happening anyway, whether you want it to or not. And I felt a pull to just reach over to my phone and WhatsApp her, hey, can we meet? And it's opened up into a wonderful. It really opened up my framing and my world. So, like, there's a way in which, when that was happening, I could tag it, right? Like conceptually, I can tag it like, oh, this is an encounter with the primordial. Oh, I'm being called to the ultimate, right? Like I know that that's happening. It just gives me language for it, but it doesn't take away from the lived experience of it, the embodied experience of it.
No, it shouldn't remove the mystery at all. Uh, I mean, let's refine it a little. So,
Yeah.
intuition, and then insight, and then inspiration. Um, that's basically how uh, how it uh, how it how it happens in me. I think when we if you allow me to play with the metaphor, I
Yeah.
think when we get those moments when the North Star of our spirit, the North Pole of our spirit, and the South Pole of our soul suddenly touch each other, right? And
Yeah.
then we get charged in a powerful way. Um, I think because for me that is the greatest homing of our finite transcendence. Our primordiality reminds us that we're finite. We cannot give it to ourselves. Our
Mm-hmm.
right? Our spirit, the ultimacy, reminds us, but we are not trapped. We have a capacity to go beyond. Um, we've talked about it psychologically. We've talked about it cognitively, insight, intuition, inspiration. We've talked about it, in terms of existential. You get the sense of the binding together, the lived,
Mm-hmm.
like you're trying to emphasize the lived aspect of finite transcendence. Those are the moments, and here's where I would try to end, where I feel the most human.
Yeah.
And for me, that would be the final thing I'd want to say about that.
Would we have time to take questions from
Yes,
the chat? Great.
yes, very much.
I just love that we like explicated the underground man problem and then come back full circle to like reclamation of finite transcendence. It's
Yeah,
beautiful,
yeah.
beautiful arc.
Thank you, thank you for doing that. Yeah.
So okay, um, here's a question from George or Jorge,
Yeah.
which is do sports that enable flow can they be considered a practice in the ecology of practices, like tennis, for example? I think we talked about bouldering as well, to the degree
Yeah,
bouldering is a sport. Yeah.
definitely, definitely. I mean, and the better the sport is at having a philosophical framework around it. What do you mean? So sports used to had a very developed framework. It was called sportsmanship. I get that the term is sexist, but whatever. Right? The idea that no, what you're doing when you're in the flow state is you're trying to keep a framework around that will afford it transferring. The idea is to become a good sport was something that you then took into your life. And when sports that get us into the flow state are ritualized with that philosophical framework, you can see them cross culturally. Think of the ball game in Mesoamerica, right? You can see sport becoming properly ritualized exactly in that fashion. Yes,
Mhm.
and but that matters, right? If you, I mean, it's really how are you showing up when you're playing? The ethic and the orientation of sportsmanship, being a good sport, is as much a part of the ritual as the flow state, because the sportsmanship is what affords the broad and deep transfer of that flow state to other dimensions of your life.
So I'm reading, I'm scanning the chat for questions.
Yeah,
What was sort of like
yeah.
doing this? Well, let's say this is really interesting. How do you, John, personally get back the to the perspectival standpoint? And I want to expand. That's all the question was, but I also want to expand the scope of that question a little bit. Um, how do you personally return to the standpoint um, in a context-sensitive manner? Right? Because sometimes what destabilizes us is the ambiguity in the context that when you recenter, you don't necessarily recenter in the same place to continue on sort of the verbiage, right?
Yeah.
But yet we also don't know necessarily having been knocked off center where the point to return to might be.
So I return to that perspectival centering. My practice is to seek sense. It's inventio, so it's seeking and sensing. Sophroson. because
Mm,
Sofferson is to re-inhabit and resculpt my salience landscaping in a way that connects me to, right, orienting to a greater reality. Um, and so for me, Sofferson is the solution to Vellman's reflectiveness gap. So Vellman proposes flow, the experience of flow, but the problem with flow, as we typically understand it, Csikszentmihalyi, is flow is bound to specific domains. And this goes to what I said a few minutes ago. There's the problem of transfer. Sofferson is basically when you're flowing at the level of orientation and agent arena co-identification. That's what's going on in Sofferson. I'm not forcing myself. I'm being tempted. I like to use because when you're tempted, who's tempting you? It's you, but it's not you. It's the other that's not you, right? This is why Hermes is a trickster figure because there's
mm,
temptation to transcendence, and you often have to get tricked into it in an important way. So Sofferson is right. Can I catch being tempted by the call of the true, the good, and the beautiful? That's how I try to return out of abstract reflection. Can I pick up that sense? And often it helps me. One of the things I'm trying to do is I call it remember, recognize, acknowledge, and appreciate. I try to remember and recognize, acknowledge, and appreciate when that other that is me, Hermes, helps me to get back. And I will sometimes, and this goes to, like I said, the kind of prayer, I will sometimes say, Hermes, help me back. I will give credit. I will do the same thing to Socrates, right? Oh, now you'll hear me doing that. Well, thank that. That's Socrates. I try to give I properly acknowledge. And these are ways of because internalizing the sage and realizing Sopherson are bound together, because my ideal self and my future self are being imaginally integrated with the sage, and that's what's tempting me. That's the other that is me that is tempting me that constitutes Sopherson. So I'm re-inhabiting and reorienting my salience landscaping. And that gives me that I'm neither a mere wanton caught up in salience without understanding or a mere Hamlet pursuing endless understanding disconnected from salience. I've got salience and understanding when it works, Socratically bound together and calling me towards greater realization within and without. That's what I sense and seek for. There's a kind of there's a kind of it's not it's not a negative. It's a pronounced positive peace. Um, so I'm feeling it right now, for example, and I like it's there's a like there's a kind of joy to it, which is not the same thing as pleasure. The joy is the sense of being
mm.
connected to something that is true, good, and beautiful, real, highly meaningful, etc. Um, so that's how I typically those are the kinds of practices I do to try and bring it about. This is why Sofferson is so important. I think Sofferson is the existential answer to the reflectiveness gap.
John, I'm so stoked for this next question. It will probably have to be our last one,
Okay.
but I am bowled over at I think what is the implicit proposal, and I can't wait to read it to you.
Okay.
This is from Wild and Shy Moments. Okay.
Great title.
Um,
Wow.
right? As a 30-year Zen practitioner,
Wow.
mother, and social worker, I wonder about the underground woman problem, inflation of caregiving, and collapse of the impossibility of agency to transform others, where the underground man problem goes upwards in infinite regress, malforming the ultimate. I hear Wild and Shy Moments, proposing that the opposite, like down into the primordial. I don't
Yeah.
know. What do you
Yeah.
think about
Yeah.
this?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, first of all, congratulations on being a practitioner for 30 years. I admire that. Um, and thank you also for this insight. I hadn't considered this. Um, um, so, I mean, I want to give credit where credit due. This is something Jordan Peterson talks about. I mean, he takes it into political lens that I'm not happy with, but the idea of and yeah, and we have archetypes around this: the all-consuming mother, um, being smothered, and people play with that word. Like I know people that, the problem is I didn't have a mother. I had a smother, um, uh, um, and, and and that sense that one can get drawn in, that one can be drawn apart, fatigued is another. So compassion fatigue is also that we get drawn into that where our agency is consumed. um, I think that's very, very powerful. So for me, sorry, this is very transitional for me. This is something that, I mean, everything for me is transitional, but I mean, this is something that's recent for me and still very liminal and raw. And I mentioned earlier, I've been trying to internalize Jesus the way I've internalized Socrates and the Buddha. And one of the things I'm trying to do, the book, The Philosophy of Jesus as a Way of Life, is particularly helpful about this, is to try and see Jesus as somebody who is able to draw upon the well of compassion without drowning in it. Um, and there's some there's something there. He I think we would agree he is a sage of compassion. He exemplifies it, and yet he doesn't seem to suffer many of the things we're worried about here. There seems to be no law. If we're going to use the tropes, because they were already introduced by the question, okay, he doesn't seem a lot. He doesn't seem to lose the masculine, even though he is deeply drawn upon the feminine. This intrigues me profoundly about him. I'm feeling called by that. I'm feeling, how can I be simultaneously called into deeper compassion without that, as you've rightly posed in your question, undermining my agency? And what seems to be doing that, right, is that he has this relationship that, like he talks about it in the Gospel of John. I'm in the Father's in me, so you can be in me and thereby in the Father. Like he goes deeper into the primordial while going deeper into the ultimate in like in a way that counterbalances drowning. Like, if you allow a metaphor, he's got a lifeline to the sky that allows him to go very deep into the well, but he can always resurface when he needs to. I'm sorry, this is kind of inchoate because I'm struggling to get this, but like this is something really, really like. And so there's this tremendous compassion. People are in him, but he's then in God and God's in him. This is some, I was when I was talking to Hermes, this came out in a really powerful way, is that Jesus is different for me than the Buddha and Socrates. Notice the word I said. I didn't say better, I said different. Okay, because unlike the Buddha and Socrates, Jesus has gone into how I see God and how and I experience God and how God comes into me in a way in which the Buddha and Socrates haven't. That's probably because of my upbringing. It's probably because I'm in the West. I'm not trying to make any absolute claims about Christianity. I'm trying to say that Jesus is more than enlightened. And I think I'm picking up on that, and that is his way. I hadn't put this together, so thank you for this. This is like, Nitter talks about he passes over into Buddhism in order to return into Christianity, and your question is helping me to do that really profoundly, Zen and come back, right? And how compassion is deeply wedded to wisdom. Wisdom is the recentering in ultimacy, so that we can draw deeply from the well. The Tao is a well that is never used up, right? Without drowning, and so that's how the compassion and the wisdom come together. And so not to try and ridiculously convert you or anything, I recommend taking a look at um, the sage Jesus, because he seems to be the person who is really providing a strong model, a role model, and that for me is answering the question you posed. And like I said, Marshall Davis's work, where he has a non-dual interpretation of Christianity, would be particularly resonant for somebody like yourself who comes from a Zen tradition. And then the book, The Philosophy of Jesus as a Way of Life, which is practice, right? It gives you how to practice. I think it's by Colburn. I might be misremembering the name. Anyways, um, profound question. Um, and this is how it's working itself out in me and how I see it working itself out in people like Knitter and Davis and the author of The Philosophy of Jesus as a Way of Life.
Fantastic. What an amazing note to end on, John. I think that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you all so much for participating, for submitting your questions. As always, we welcome them. The next Q&A will be on February 28th, I believe, with Mark Miller, who, just to repeat, his course is on the Lectern at the moment. It is called Generations of Joy, the Cognitive Science of Happiness and Well-Being. So please head over to lectern.johnvervaeke.com and then take a look, and we'll see you next month. Thanks so much, John. Thanks so much for amazing Q&A.
Thank you, Ethan. Thank you for all the great questions, both from my Lectern supporters and from people on YouTube. Very much appreciated. I have a pronounced aesthetic and existential sense for good questions. I mean, a sense of appreciation is what I mean, in both senses of the word appreciation, understanding and valuing. And so I really want to thank everybody. The questions were ecstatic for me. They drew me beyond myself. And I really, really appreciate that. Please take a chance of this. Please don't miss the chance. This great opportunity to study with Mark Miller. I promise you, you will not regret it.
Thank you, everybody.